All right, let's get into one of the most unbelievable missions of World War II, the Doolittle Raid. It's an incredible story of guts, revenge, and a desperate need for a victory. But it's also a story with some staggering and tragic unintended consequences that would literally change the course of the war. So let's just start with this picture, because it basically sums up how wild this whole operation was. What you're looking at is a B-25 Mitchell bomber. It's a big, twin-engine Army plane, and it's taking off from a Navy aircraft carrier. This just shouldn't be happening. These planes need long runways, not a few hundred feet of moving steel in the middle of the ocean. So the big question is, why on earth would they even try something so insane? Well, to get it, you have to rewind a few months to the winter of 1941. America was just reeling from the attack on Pearl Harbor. The news coming from the Pacific was just bleak. Defeat after defeat. National morale was at rock bottom. President Roosevelt knew he had to do something, and fast. The country needed a win. They needed a sign that they could actually fight back. And just 2 weeks after Pearl Harbor, he made his orders clear. He didn't need a huge military victory. He needed a symbolic one. He needed to strike the Japanese homeland to rally a shaken nation. But how do you do that? I mean, Japan is thousands of miles away, shielded by the entire Pacific Ocean. A conventional attack was completely out of the question. So military planners started thinking way outside the box. And the craziest idea came from a Navy captain, Francis Lowe, who had a light bulb moment watching Army bombers practice near a carrier. And the plan they cooked up was pure, high-stakes improvisation. It was a one-way trip. Army bombers would take off from a Navy carrier, something that had never been done. They'd hit their targets in Japan, and then, well, landing back on the carrier was impossible. The hope, and I mean the hope, was that they'd have enough fuel to make it to friendly airfields in China. Every single part of this was a massive, massive gamble. And these photos, wow, they just show you how tight this whole thing was. Look at how these B-25s are jammed onto the deck of the USS Hornet. Their wingspans were so big, they barely cleared the ship's command tower. We're talking inches. There was absolutely zero room for error. They even had to shove the carrier's own fighter planes below deck just to make space. What's so amazing here is the mix of brilliant engineering and just crude fixes. To even have a chance, the planes needed to be lighter and carry way more fuel. So they yanked out heavy machine guns and radios. They stuffed collapsible fuel tanks in every spare corner. But my favorite part? They installed painted broomsticks in the tail to look like machine guns, hoping it would be enough to scare off any Japanese fighters. They even ditched the top-secret high-tech Norden bomb sight for a simple 20-cent device, because at low altitude, the fancy one was useless anyway. Now, a mission this audacious needs a leader to match, and they found him in Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle, a true legend in aviation. This photo just captures the whole spirit of the mission perfectly. Here is wiring a Japanese friendship medal to a 500-pound bomb. The message was pretty clear. This was personal. And what about the men themselves? The 80 airmen were all volunteers. They were only told the mission was extremely hazardous. That's it. They had no idea where they were going until they were already far out at sea. These were the best B-25 crews the Army had, and they willingly signed up to fly straight into the unknown. So, the plan is in motion. You've got this whole task force, led by the USS Hornet and its escort, the USS Enterprise, sailing in complete radio silence for 2 weeks, creeping deeper and deeper into enemy waters. Can you just imagine the tension on board? And then, on the morning of April 18th, the plan hits a snag, a big one. The task force gets spotted by a Japanese patrol boat, hundreds of miles earlier than they'd planned. And before they can sink it, the boat radios a warning to Japan. The element of surprise is gone. Doolittle has to make a snap decision. Turn back or launch right now, a full 10 hours ahead of schedule. He chooses to launch. That decision to launch early was a massive problem. It added about 170 extra nautical miles to their flight. It meant more time in the air, and crucially, a lot less fuel to make it to safety in China. A mission that was already on a knife's edge just became nearly impossible. So with the ship pitching in rough seas, Doolittle himself guns the engines and takes the lead. He uses just 467 feet of runway to get that bomber airborne. I mean, it's an unbelievable feat of flying. And then, one by one, against all odds, all 16 planes followed him, roaring off that deck and into history. A few hours later, they were over Japan. They came in low, they came in fast, and they completely stunned the Japanese defenses. They hit their targets, factories, military sites, across several cities. Now, from a military standpoint, the actual physical damage, it was pretty minimal. But that was never really the main goal, because the real impact of this raid wasn't measured in busted buildings. It was measured in psychology and strategy. It was about to change the entire war in the Pacific. This really shows you the two different realities of the raid. For the United States, it was this incredible triumph the country was desperate for. It proved Japan wasn't invincible. Doolittle actually thought he'd be court-martialed for losing all his planes, but instead, he got the Medal of Honor. For Japan, though, the physical damage was light, yeah, but the psychological shock was immense. Their leaders had promised the homeland could never be attacked. The raid planted seeds of fear and doubt. And that shock had massive strategic consequences. The Japanese military, deeply embarrassed, became obsessed with making sure another raid could never happen. This obsession pushed Admiral Yamamoto to speed up his grand plan to attack Midway Island, where he hoped to lure and destroy America's aircraft carriers. And that decision, it led them straight into the Battle of Midway just 2 months later, a catastrophic defeat for Japan and the real turning point of the entire war. But the raiders themselves paid a steep price. Running on fumes because of that early launch, flying in the dark, through bad weather, they never made it to their designated airfields. 15 of the 16 planes either crash-landed or were bailed out of over China. Most of the men were rescued by Chinese allies, but 8 were captured by the Japanese, and 3 of them were executed. The story of the raid's impact, though, doesn't end there. In fact, the most tragic consequence, the heaviest price of all, was paid by the very people who helped those American flyers survive. 250,000. Just let that number sink in. That's the horrifying estimated number of Chinese civilians who were murdered by the Japanese army in the months that followed. It was a brutal campaign of pure reprisal, punishing the Chinese population for giving aid and shelter to Doolittle's men. A truly staggering cost. And this really brings us to the final difficult question. The Doolittle Raid was, without a doubt, a spectacular success for American morale, and its consequences helped win the war. But knowing the unimaginable price paid by Chinese civilians, was it worth it? It's a question that complicates a simple story of heroism, leaving us to weigh a pivotal victory against a devastating and heartbreaking human tragedy.